1763, Filipino seamen who jumped ship in Veracruz, Mexico, were able to board ships bound for New Orleans, Louisiana. They built a permanent settlement in Louisiana and built a Manila village in 1765. About 2,000 Filipino-American residents, which today spans 10 generations, introduced shrimp farming, dancing the shrimp, and others to the United States. In 1903, the Philippine Commission passed the Pensionado Act 854 that authorized the U.S. territorial government in the Philippines to sponsor promising Filipino students to study in the United States. 100 of these students arrived in San Francisco on November 3, 1903. They were mostly males and the sons of wealthy Filipinos who had connections with the government. They attended some of the colleges in America. Among that first group were Olivia Salamanca, a pioneering woman physician, Francisco Delgado, who became Philippine Resident Commissioner in Washington, D.C., and Antonio de las Alas, who became Speaker of the House of Representatives. Throughout 1901 to 1915, Anti-Imperialist League, joined by Filipinos in America, launched its earliest anti-war mass demonstrations in the USA, led by siblings Sixto Lopez and Clemencia Lopez. In March 1902, Clemencia became the first from the Philippines to enter the White House as a representative of her subjugated people. December of 1906, the Hawaiian Sugarcane Planters Association recruited 15 young Ilocanos to work in the sugarcane plantations of Hawaii. They offered them good wages, free passage, and medical coverage. They arrived in Hawaii on December 20, 1906. They called themselves Sacadas. From 1906 to 1946, about 126 Filipinos were recruited to work in Hawaii. In 1912, the Filipino-American Association of Philadelphia Incorporated, FAPI, was organized by Agripino Halcyon and celebrates Rizal Day to provide a forum to generate goodwill, awareness, and advocacy among Americans in supporting U.S. recognition of Philippine independence. FAPI is the oldest Filipino-American organization in continuous existence, and their annual Rizal Day has the longest history in the United States. From 1920 to 1940s, Filipino-Americans organized themselves to fight discrimination and anti-Filipino riots. 7,000 Filipino-Americans volunteered to defend the Philippines, forming 2 regiments during World War II. 1960s to 1970s was known as the Great Migration of Filipinos. On October 3, 1965, Congress passed the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. It opened up a new era of Filipino immigration when the quotas were lifted to allow 20,000 Filipinos per year entry into the United States. The Philippines called this the brain drain because their finest, most educated citizens were leaving to come to America to find a better and more prosperous life for themselves and their families. More than half of these initially arriving were Filipino nurses and other medical personnel. By 1970, the Filipino population in the United States was 343,060. Most had jobs in contrast to the Monos who arrived in the 1920s and 30s. They were nurses, doctors, engineers, accountants, teachers, and business people. On September 8, 1965, Larry Delay at Leon, along with 1,500 Filipino-American farm workers, vote to strike against grape growers inside the hall of the Filipino Community Center of Delano, California. More than a week later, Cesar Chavez's group joins the Filipinos to launch the watershed movement of California's labor history, the 1965 Delano Grape Strike. In 2002, Los Angeles becomes the first city outside the Philippines to designate a permanent geographic neighborhood for Filipinos, naming it Historic Filipino Town. And in 2012, Michelle Obama designates Historic Filipino Town as a Preserve American Site.